We have a topic today that may get some people scratching their heads. And this topic has been quite thoroughly researched by Dr. Thomas Dykstra, who is we're fortunate enough to have next to us. And we've also run into some things that years ago down in New Mexico that I didn't know, and I've never shared this with you. I didn't know what we were looking at. But we were looking at some abandoned oil wells, and they had a heavy plastic liner that contained this high salt sodium mix, and it was from the oil well. And it was all contained, and the soil had very, very high levels of salt and sodium, 40,000 parts per million, 50,000 parts per million, and the government was talking that the oil companies needed to clean these up, because it was going to be a problem. We got called and it says, can you fix this? And it was 22 inches deep. And so we got a semi-trailer, I think it was 5,000 gallons of water. We put 15 pounds of our calcium in, and with a rooster tail, we squirted this over the less than 1 acre. We came back with 2 more semi-loads of just water for hydration, and it was in the fall of the year when they started getting moisture. In less than 60 days, we took that 40 to 50,000 parts per million down under 50. Every scientist, every soil lab, everybody involved started asking us questions. They say, where did the salt go? Where did the sodium go? It's like, you asked us to get rid of it. You didn't ask us to tell you how we did it or what happened.
Yes.
And he says, it couldn't have gone anywhere because we are in a contained area. This is heavy plastic. It couldn't have gone anywhere. And they did an inch by inch for 22 inches, so it didn't just move or change. And they did this every 3 feet across almost an acre. They said, what's going on? And I say, well, to be honest, I'm not sure. The only thing that I can say, and this is just throwing something against the wall, is I've heard people talk about biological transmutation, where microbes take one thing and make it into another. And I said, I have no idea, but maybe we saw this, because certain minerals and certain elements had gone up, but the salt was almost gone. The sodium was almost gone. I mean, from 50,000 to under 50 parts per million. This was in less than, I think, 30 or 60 days. This is quite a few years ago. So, biological transmutation, Dr. Tom Dykstra, go.
Oh, an uncomfortable topic. I have to say, I mean, a lot of people, I've spoken all over the world, and I was first introduced to Louis Kervran and the biological transmutations, and I hadn't really looked into it. Obviously, it didn't make sense if you're familiar with it. That is one atom turning into another atom. How this occurs, it first defies explanation. And then after reading the book and putting together some pieces of information that I have seen over my lifetime, as well as what Glenn is talking about, is now making me scratch my head that there is something seriously involved with the biological transmutations. So in a nutshell, if you've heard, and I think a lot of people have heard this because it's been tried, tested, and then abandoned, and that is, how does so much calcium get into the eggshells of chickens? Because we can feed them 0 calcium and they still produce eggs, or we can give them a lot of calcium and it doesn't seem to make the eggs any thicker. And there's all these little games to show that if you reduce the amount of calcium, they're still putting out more than it's actually coming in. There have been terrible suggestions thinking, well, maybe it's just evaporating out of the air. Where's this stuff coming from? And so I know people, you think to yourself, how does this much calcium come from the air? I don't understand. And so the observation was made, as talked about in the book, is that the chickens, once they were fed mica or silica, had vast increases of calcium in their shells, silica. And so the transformation, the transmutation of silica to calcium has been suggested. An understanding that this is actually a possibility at first seems to go against the whole idea of science in general, and I get that because I felt that same way. However, there were other problems too, and that is when I was going into school, especially in neurobiology, they talked a lot about the sodium-potassium pump, and so sodium and potassium need to be under tightly regulated conditions in order for things to work, such as our nerve cells. Well, I get that. However, if it's really that sensitive, why do we have more salt diets than we have potassium diets? There are books written on salt diets, and there are books written on how you need to decrease your intake of salt, or maybe even if you need how to increase your intake of salt, or whatever you need to do, but you need to regulate salts, and this is all in a sodium sort of context. However, it's never mentioned. Potassium is never mentioned, and yet there's a massive amount of potassium in our system. So the transmutation between salt, the sodium, and the potassium also hit me when this was discussed as well. And so these are the type of things I was scratching my head thinking, wow, is this actually possible? Now, it becomes a little bit more possible to me as I reason through and understand that the number of microbes that have been described on planet Earth are probably, I think we know maybe 1%, 2% at most, but 98% or more of the microbes are not even described on this planet. We don't know how they work. And so because of that, we don't know what they are doing. But all of this has been suggested to be mediated by microbes, obviously not at very high temperatures or cold temperatures. You want to say something, don't you?
I have a question.
I hope I can answer it.
So out of all the years that agronomists and academia has been studying microbes in the soil, you're saying what percent do we know?
It's anywhere between 1 to 2%. That's how many are described.
1 to 2%?
Correct. 2% is on the high end.
I don't think that's a passing grade. We can send somebody to the moon, but we can't identify more than 1 or 2% or understand?
Yeah.
What are these guys doing in the universities? I don't even answer that.
Would prefer not to answer that, if I could.
Well, I'm sorry, but my point is, that seems like an awfully low number.
Yes, it strikes everybody that same way.
For as many years as microbiologists have been studying soil.
Yeah.
So, I apologize, but it's just like, are you sure that number's right? Because that's really, really horrible low.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible low if it's 1%, but some people think it may be as high as 2%, if that makes you feel any better.
I take back everything that I said. Okay, so it's a poor number. I apologize, but I couldn't believe that it was that low.
Yeah, don't apologize unless you mean it.
Okay.
All right.
I take it back then. Biological transmutation.
And so the sodium-potassium link was there as well, and then there are many other things that were mentioned that actually started to make sense based upon my biological background. And then I ran into him. Worst day of my life. Haven't recovered since. And one of the products that is made by GSR Calcium, I'm not going to say what the ingredient is, calcium, but is supposedly spread on a field of grams per acre and has this magnificent effect. And so there's a part of me that still kind of scratches my head thinking, well, this can't be.
Kinda?
Because it's been repeated so many times over. And I'm thinking, I don't understand how so little of the stuff is having such profound effects. Because, of course, I wasn't thinking biological transmutations. And then several things happened. And that is and I hope you'll be okay with me mentioning this right now, but was the massive failure of the calcium to affect a change in Florida. So we had a lot of the stuff down in Florida, 1 application, 2 application, 3 application, 4 application. It wasn't working. This got me scratching my head. I spent a lot of time scratching my head, trying to figure out, okay, why are we getting such magnificent results, especially in the Midwest where we're dealing with high mag soil, whereas we get down here in our sandy soils, we have virtually no effect. What is going on here? And as I was reading Kervran's book, there was the suggestion in there about the calcium to magnesium transmutation. And my interest was piqued at that point. It was especially piqued because based upon what I knew and some of the descriptions of the amazing quality of this particular calcium is that it worked like gangbusters on high mag soil. Why? What is it about magnesium that makes it so magical about some of the effects, which are extraordinary and cannot be understood, certainly outside the context of biological transmutations? So because of that, I was in a bind trying to understand and wrap my head around it, and I had heard through the grapevine that a little bit of research had been done where a little bit of this GSR calcium was placed on high mag soil under controlled conditions, and more calcium was produced than was put on based upon the minute amounts of GSR calcium that is used. So this got me scratching my head thinking, where did this calcium come from? And of course, because of the association that Kervran made with the magnesium, I started to think that maybe the magnesium was being converted over. And if the magnesium was being converted over, this would help to explain what this calcium was doing when it was spread on high mag soil. It gets better because, as we learned, it wasn't just high mag soil. It was so much more than just high mag soil. It was also compacted soil. And because it was compacted, there was no oxygen. And as there was no oxygen in there, this helped to increase the compaction level. When you spread the GSR calcium on it, it opens up the soil, and it is now breathing for the first time. And so this again, it starts to revolve around my head thinking, how is this happening? When it became apparent to me, or at least at a certain level of understanding, that magnesium might be a storage form of calcium. That when calcium loses its oxygen or it becomes compressed in the high mag soil that we're talking about, the calcium gives up the oxygen through the action of a microbe, which has not been discovered yet, or at least described, and that magnesium is now formed from calcium. There's a lot of calcium that's out there. We have a lot of calcium in Florida. As a matter of fact, too much calcium. I had mentioned that we have limestone problems. We have sinkholes in Florida. This is all related to the limestone. And so calcium is a big, big problem. We've got a shortage of magnesium, among other things. But if it was being mediated by these microbes, then this might help explain why it works like gangbusters on high mag soil and did not work in Florida. Why? We don't seem to have the microbes. If we had the microbes, I think we could do something with it. But right now, we're not dealing with any high mag soils in Florida. So if they are out there, maybe, quite possibly, we do have the microbes that are out there, but generally they're not there, is my guess. And this is part of the reason why we have calcium problems. I put calcium in quotes because it's an overabundance of calcium to the detriment of other more important minerals that I think we need to have, magnesium being just one of them. But of course, sandy soils are sandy soils, and they're deficient in a lot. So understanding how transmutations occur according to Kervran's book, piecing together understanding of things like the chicken egg and of course the sodium potassium interactions and how we are able to regulate these with a tight regulation without being able to regulate them inside our mouth when we are taking in foods. Because when you think of potassium, what do you know about potassium? Everyone keeps mentioning bananas to me, but they really don't know too many other things that potassium is found in large quantities of, and so our bodies have figured it out in some particular way. And so understanding that sodium can possibly turn into potassium and back and forth gives us now a means in order to help regulate this important salt balance that is so important in our body. And once you believe that and understand the chicken egg problem with chicken has to eat silica, it then opened up a whole new world when I did meet, and I'm touching you again, when I did meet Glenn And I found out about this product that, for lack of a better word, seems miraculous. I don't think it's miraculous, but it seems miraculous because it defies science. But the massive success that has been had on HiMag soil is an easy attestment. As a matter of fact, I remember you talking during multiple presentations before, saying, if you have HiMag soil, we can help you. And so I understand why, starting to believe that this may be the reason why, and that if magnesium is a storage form of calcium, then by releasing the calcium, the microbes might be able to convert the calcium back temporarily. It might only be for an hour or a day. It may not be much longer than that, but the calcium then becomes purely 100% bioavailable to a plant. It can be taken up, because measurements have also been made where more calcium is ending up in the plants than was put down by the GSR calcium, saying, well, where did this calcium come from? This in part could be explained by the conversion of magnesium into calcium is quickly sucked up by the plants, causes a massive growth and health of the plant, higher Brix levels, BRIX levels. And so because of this, all of this seems to start falling into place and making sense. It's still uncomfortable to talk about. This is not accepted, but honestly, how could it? Because this is a relatively new field. I know there are many supporters of Louis Kervran. I find myself to be one of them right now, because it helps me to explain some things that right now are not explainable. For those of you who are happy not to have things explained to you and prefer not to think about biological transmutations, you can remain in that world. For me, as a scientist, I try to explain things to the best of my abilities, and sometimes that involves uncomfortable theories.
You have to go on thin ice to see how cold the water is.
Yeah, you do. You do.
We've seen this for years and years. And we had a gentleman in central Nebraska that over 2 years he put down 1 pound of our calcium. And he had soil tests every spring, every fall for 15 years. He was serious on soil testing. And he GPS'd the spots where he tested. And he came back after the 1 or 2 years that there was about 1 pound or 2, somewhere in there, a small amount of calcium. And he lays the soil test down. He says, how can 1 pound or 2 of your wiffle dust...
Per acre. You're talking about 1 pound per acre.
I'm sorry, 1 pound or 2 per acre.
Per acre, okay.
Applied with water, increase my soil test by 1,100 pounds. I said, I have no idea.
That's a good, safe answer, by the way.
Well,
sometimes that's better.
Because, and it's easy for me to do that, because there's a lot of stuff I don't know. So it's like, I have no idea. I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He goes, it's a great thing. He says, you know what calcium costs and what the freight is? Yeah. He goes, I want to repeat this. I want to check other fields. And we did. This was in Nebraska. We've done this in Kansas. We've seen it in Texas. We've seen it in Colorado. We've seen it happen in Washington with a gentleman who you talked to, where he put down our dormant calcium and...
Shameless plug.
And some sugar from your recommendation, and his calcium went up, and soil calcium went up by 30%. His available phosphorus went up almost 3 times what it was. All these minerals went up. He called, he goes, I've got several questions. He's telling me these, and he goes, when you get up here, I want to show you these numbers. So this was Nick that shared this, that did all this, and he laid these numbers out, and he says, he showed me the percentages that these minerals increased in 60 days. And he goes, I got several questions. Number one, where were all these minerals to begin with? Why didn't the soil lab show me?
Right.
And what happened now that they're showing up? And again, it's like...
I don't know. Yes.
A swing and a miss. I didn't know. because I didn't know enough about biological transmutation. I've read about it. I've heard about it. I think I've seen it happen, but you and I are both a lot alike, that we won't talk about something unless we have done it, we've repeated it, we've replicated it, and it's predictable. There's too many people out there that are talking about a thought, an idea, a rumor, something they read, something they heard, without replication, without conviction, without confidence, without replication.
Without scientific reasoning too, because sometimes you have to reason through things that are not established in science.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting that you mentioned. It's an excellent point about the sugar, because this effect, I don't want you to think, and anybody to think, that you just take this, magic, miraculous calcium, you spread it over your field, and boom, you got a lot of calcium. And when you put it with sugar, you actually feed the microbes. This is imperative, because I want to make the point that none of this happens without microbes. Therefore, if you want your magnesium to be converted over to calcium, assuming that's what's going on, you must throw microbial food at it. And so that includes two things in general that you guys have done. One is the sugar, but the other is fish emulsion. The fish emulsion is also a good feedstock for a lot of the microbes. They like to eat that as well. And so you have noticed more beneficial effects from the same dose of calcium when you add sugar and or fish emulsion, because both of them serve as food. And therefore, once you have a food source, the microbial population increases, even if it's just temporary, because sometimes this stuff may not last much more than a week in the soil. Sometimes that happens, and you have to reapply. But we've now got this, I'm going to call it fish food, but it's a food for microbes made from fish, not fish food. We're going to differentiate between true fish food.
Food from fish?
Food from fish is a much better way of putting it.
Sushi.
Yes, I like it.
Liquid sushi.
Liquid sushi. We have...
Can I jump in?
Please do. I'm struggling here, so yeah.
For many years, we could put our calcium down and we could open up the soil. We'd relax the surface tension, we'd get better water penetration, and all of a sudden, bang, the growers would see it in their plants. It didn't matter what continent, it didn't matter what crop. We opened up the ground and shabam, they saw an increase in growth, in quality, in health, in leaf size and leaf color, many different things. Up until about 6 or 7 years ago, we put our calcium down, and we're waiting to get the hug and the kiss from the trophy girl, and we go back in and it says, well, you put the water in the soil, you got better water penetration, but we didn't see anything as far as the crop. It's like, oh, we've been doing this for a long time. So we started looking and looking and looking, and that's where we came up and started looking is anywhere we didn't see a response, we had a low carbon to nitrogen ratio. And when I mean low, we're talking less than 16 to 1, which is what most soil is at. We'll put a little copy from the NRCS talking about the carbon to nitrogen. The reason I'm bringing this in with the biological transmutation is the carbon from sugar or the carbon in the soil has to be there to feed the microbes to make anything good happen. Now, don't think we're crazy on this biological transmutation. There's a fine line between idiot and genius, and that fine line is success.
I like that line.
Yes.
I like that line.
So we have jumped into a topic that is very seldom talked about because most people are scared of it. I appreciate the time, Dr. Dykstra, that you gave to us. If you have any comments or questions, where can they reach you at, Doctor?
They can reach me at dykstralabs.com. They can also, if they want to learn a little bit more about some of the other stuff that I do, I don't talk about biological transmutations on YouTube, at least not yet. And so, but I do have a number of videos. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more, you can simply do a search for Thomas Dykstra. on YouTube and you will find me.
Yeah. So for Dr. Dykstra and me and all the team at SoilWorks, we thank you for tuning in and looking forward to the next time we can talk. Thanks.